Hey everyone, thank you for taking a minute to watch this video in my writing update. My name is Jason. I'm a pastor in the Seattle area, and I am currently trying to write a book on Jonah. And there's a lot of books on Jonah, and my book in particular is focusing on the idea of calling and identity and how people who are unsure of what to do, we might try to run away from what God is calling us to do. We might be hesitant. We might be fearful. There's all kinds of different things that might go into play in this conversation around calling and identity. And so the book is written for people who are in a transition season and trying to determine what to do with their life, and trying to look at Jonah as not necessarily the greatest example of what we should do, but he is still someone that we can learn from. And Jonah is one of my favorite books in the Bible. Every time I read through Jonah, and it's just 4 short chapters, every time I read through it, I am challenged and encouraged. And I'm reminded again that God can use very imperfect people to do very important things. And so that's good news for all of us. And so as an update, my goal has been to have this book done by the end of June, and between 40 to 50,000 words probably. And I'm coming close to the end of my outline, and I'm about 37,000 words right now, which is pretty cool. It's a good feeling. And I have done no editing. So pray for me, friends, because that might be a time where I turn into hating this book that I've been working on, because I just know I make a lot of mistakes when I write, and so I need your prayers. And so, but yeah, so I am coming close to the end of my outline, and I'm feeling pretty good about a lot of the things that I've been working on. I have a whole chapter about vomit in the Bible and vomit in the Book of Jonah, and that was fun to write. And there might be some things that I have to cut out of that. I understand, but I also talk about deconstruction, and how there sometimes are necessary things that have to happen in our lives when we go through moments of transformation. And some of that we might call deconstruction. There might be some things that we've been holding on to that we need to let go of that are not God's design for humanity. And that's okay. And so talk a little bit about that. The chapter that I just wrote yesterday was about anger, and how Jonah was angry that the Lord relented and spared Nineveh. Now, Jonah is the most successful prophet in the whole Bible. No other prophet do they preach 8 words and a whole city repents. And so he has a lot of success, but at the same time, he's angry because God is doing something that Jonah didn't like. Jonah did not like the Ninevites. He wanted God to smite them, and here God is sparing them. And so he's angry at God. He's angry that the Ninevites repented. He's angry at all of life, and he just wants to die. But he goes out to the side of the city on the east side, and he just waits for whatever God's going to do. And he's letting his anger move him into isolation and greater bitterness. And that's kind of where I stopped. But the reason I find this so important is because anger is motivating so many people in American culture right now. And in particular in politics, we see anger as a driving motivator for so many different issues. And anger might build some passion for a while, but the danger is that it will burn us out. And so I'm wary of people who are using anger to motivate their constituency, because I think that's a poisoned well that we draw from when all we do is draw up anger and grievance. And so when we look at this idea of calling in the Bible and look at then Jonah being angry, I think there's something we can learn from that. Sometimes you might be so successful that you can't handle it and you get burned out and you get angry about that. Other times things aren't going the way we want and we get angry about that. And so if we are looking at the work that God's put in front of us and only finding ourselves angry, then what's going on in us? What's going on in our hearts? And so, so there's a lot to unpack in that little section of Jonah. But then next week, the next chapter that I'm going to try to tackle is focusing on God's compassion. And spoiler alert, God has compassion on Jonah, and he's had compassion on Jonah even when Jonah was running away. But the compassion that Jonah experiences from the Lord, I think, is what ultimately led him to write the book. Because nowhere in the book of Jonah does God say, write this down and tell anybody about it. But he chose to. And I think it's because God's compassion transformed his heart in a way that he could say, like, people need to hear this. People need to hear about my own stubbornness, my brokenness, my rejection of my calling and my identity, and how God transformed me by saving my enemies. That's a pretty compelling story. And so I'm excited to come to this next chapter and kind of land the plane into this first rough draft before I start editing. So please pray for me. If you want to stay up to date on my different updates and other things that I do on this channel, please feel free to subscribe. If you have questions or ideas or suggestions, I'd love to hear all of that. Leave a comment. I look forward to hearing from you, and stay tuned for more updates on the Book of Jonah and my writing process. Thank you all.